Okay, we're going to look at some of the growth structures of the brain, and then we're going to dissect this brain today. It's a nice specimen, large and heavy brain. This is a big individual, has a very large cerebellum, and certainly there's some structures that we can see, some growth structures. So we got a nice structure here, specimen. This guy was a large individual, has a very large cerebellum with very large peduncles. In fact, here comes the trigeminal nerve, which is exiting somewhat more caudal than you would expect, but it's just this guy has really large cerebral peduncles. Here's the medulla. We see the vertebral arteries coming up. There's the anterior spinal artery between the two. So his vasculature is also a little bit different. Pica is coming off here and going around to the side. Here's pica winding around on the other side, the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. We come up and we see the basilar artery lying on the pons. So we just have some pia holding this stuff down. Okay. We see the internal carotid artery coming up. We see the optic chiasm here. Here comes a big cranial nerve 3 coming out of the intrapeduncular cistern there, right underneath the optic chiasm. The internal carotid artery is throwing off the posterior communicating artery, and it's throwing off the middle cerebral artery, which I can't quite get to. There it is. And then off of here is coming the anterior. If we pull back the optic chiasm, we can see the anterior artery coming in and the communicating branch there, anterior cerebral artery.
Can you show that one more time, Dr. Storms?
And here's the anterior communicating right there. Okay, the posterior communicating. Here's the posterior cerebral artery here. If we look underneath there, we can see maybe see the mammillary bodies right there, okay, which are part of the circuit of Papez. In comes the olfactory bulbs. The olfactory bulbs are coming in and they're making a little turn and proceeding right into the uncus of the temporal lobe. And then deep to here is going to be the amygdala and the hippocampus, which we hopefully will find in today's dissection. So if we want to turn the brain over to its ventral side, we still see there's a lot of pia still holding these different gyri firm. Got a nice big sulcus here. If we pull this apart, we're looking right down into the corpus callosum, which we will see better once we start to dissect. And then the pia is basically holding together all of these other fissures and lobes. So if I break open the pia here, back up here's Ventricles area. Okay. And if we were able to open this up a little bit, okay, we're looking into the insular cortex in there. And this top part here is the auditory cortex. If we look on the other side of the brain, the left side of the brain, see if we can break open this fissure. Just breaking the pia off of it here. Again, we open it up. And here's basically the auditory cortex lying on top. Pull off a little bit more of this pia. Okay, we can open it up a little bit. And then back up in here is Ventricles area. Broca's area is up here. Okay, so we got the auditory cortex, and then we can't quite see it here. There's some of the insular cortex down here deep. Clean that off a little bit with my finger. There's the insular cortex, long and short gyri. And then perhaps we could even see planum temporal right here. This little smooth area right here going back up into what's going to be Ventricles area. The angular gyrus, the marginal gyrus. See if we can find the central sulcus. Central sulcus should come about all the way through. So not quite all the way through, but this pretty much looks like the central sulcus. Okay, or actually, no, let's see, I'm a little bit anterior. Here comes the central sulcus here. Okay, so this is motor cortex right here. This is, if we pull some pia back here, we got the somatosensory cortex here. Okay, so the homunculus would lie down here. We would have the hands and the face. So this is the facial area of the motor cortex. And we come back up, and if you look inside, you would see the medial areas. So for example, the feet would be hanging down in here. So the feet are supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. And then the middle cerebral artery, which is coming out of this little fissure here and splaying out. There's a piece of it there. the middle cerebral arteries coming out and supplying all these areas of the homunculus here. Okay, so we're taking most of this pia off, and then we're revealing the major sulci and gyri here. We could name these off, but that's not necessary. They're just named by their location. So we have a nice, well-preserved brain here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to do some axial slices down through the brain. We're going to try to look at some of the internal structures. That's what we'll do now. So I'm going to try to get on as straight a plane as possible. This is a brain knife. Okay, and the first cut we don't really need. But the first thing that we can notice is we can certainly start to see the gray matter. These are cell bodies. And then the white matters, little tracts of myelinated axons between the cell bodies. Okay. So now we should start to get down into some other structures here. I'm going to flip this over. Okay. So I have two nice axial slices, and again all we're seeing is some white matter here. Same thing we're seeing here. We're not down into the ventricles yet, but there's the corpus callosum there, a few centimeters down. So now we're going to make a slice. So all we're seeing now is cortex, gray matter and white matter. Now we've sliced into some structures. I can feel them. So now we're going to take these and flip them over, hopefully. Okay, good. Okay, again, we're seeing some beautiful tracts of white matter here. We're looking down onto the superior fasciculus here, superior longitudinal fasciculus. So it's just a band of myelinated axons that are connecting basically the frontal lobe back across the parietal lobe, back into the temporal lobe. Okay. So we should get into the ventricles on this next slice. Something hard. Okay. Now we're going to flip these slices over, if I can keep them falling apart. Okay, now we've cracked into the ventricles a little bit. In fact, we can see here the outline of the ventricle. We're not quite into it. Okay, we've got some fibers of the fornix running around here. Same thing in the back, so the fornix was coming around this way.
And is that the corpus callosum right in the middle?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and you actually see the little bands of fibers. You can see.
Let me get in nice and close on that.
You can actually see the axons in there. Now we're going to continue with these slices. Now we're into the ventricles. Okay. And let's try to flip him over. Oh, nice. Oh, this is a good slice here. So now we're seeing the top part of the ventricles. Okay. And we can actually see a little bit of the head of the caudate there. And we see a little piece of the thalamus starting to emerge. Okay, part of the insular cortex here we're getting down into. And we can see all of these stripes in here. These are the striosomes. So we're beginning to see a little bit of the putamen. So now if we come over here, okay, we're looking down into the ventricles. Got some nice choroid plexus there in the ventricle. Okay, and then what we're looking at here is the actual piece of the fornix there coming across. This is the anterior commissure here. Part of the corpus callosum is gone. Here's a posterior commissure. So we're getting down below the corpus callosum. Beautiful shot of the fornix there coming around. Precommissal fibers are going up to the septal nuclei, which are right in here. Okay, and then we're looking for the thalamus and the hypothalamus a little deeper. So let's take another slice. Okay, I'm getting through the insular cortex here. I can feel it. Let's flip this over. Nice view of the ventricles there. Okay. Now we're starting to see some neuroanatomy.
Okay.
Got a nice axial slice here. We see the anterior commissure, commissural fibers. We see the posterior commissure. Here's the column of the fornix coming down. Okay. And then here we've got the head of the caudate, nice and clear, in this lateral wall of the ventricle. We see the nice anterior limb of the internal capsule, and we can see the fibers displaying up. So these are fibers coming out of the thalamus, which is here, up to parts of the frontal cortex. Okay, and then those fibers are sharing themselves on the other side. Then we see the beginning of the putamen here. We don't see much of the globus pallidus, but we're starting to see a little bit of the posterior limb. The next cut will reveal the posterior limb and the putamen. The globus pallidus a little better. And we're picking up a little bit, so the lateral geniculate nucleus would be here. We're starting to pick up a little bit of the optic radiations here, but we'll see them a little bit deeper. And then here we have the insular cortex for visceral processing. And M4 is coming out right there. And we see the frontal horn of the lateral ventricles, and we see part of the posterior horn. We're not down to the inferior horn yet. And we have some more choroid plexus there, producing the CSF in the ventricles. And so we still see the anterior commissure and the posterior commissure. We still see the frontal horns of the lateral ventricle. Okay, and then deep into here is going to be the third ventricle. Okay, here's the posterior horn of the lateral ventricle. Some more choroid plexus in there. Okay, and we're cutting down, and we're almost into the calcarine sulcus. Okay, so the calcarine sulcus is running right through here. In fact, we've cut right down into it, so we're starting to see some of the optic radiations coming around into the superior bank of the calcarine sulcus. Okay, we should get some interesting structures here. A little thicker than I wanted to there, but oh yes, that's fine. Okay, we've got some beautiful things here. So again, here comes the column of the fornix running around. Here's the part of the cerebral aqueduct. So we've cut down through the third ventricle. We still have the caudate. We have the putamen. And now we see a little bit of the globus pallidus in here. Okay, a little bit of the thalamus. We're getting down below the thalamus. But coming out of the thalamus and coming around, here's our optic radiations coming back down to the banks of the calcarine sulcus back here. And if we looked at a more sagittal slice, we would see the calcarine sulcus is running right along through there. So we have an upper bank and a lower bank. We still can see some of the anterior limb of the internal capsule. And we still are into the insular cortex there, the long and short gyri. Okay. Again, we're seeing some nice structures here. We've still got a little bit of caudate left. Okay. We still have nice putamen. Now we can see the globus pallidus a little better. Has an inner and an outer segment. Okay, we can see a little bit of a bump here. That's the lateral geniculate nucleus. And then going forward a little bit, here we have the loop of Meyer. It's coming out forward a little bit and then wrapping back around. So damage here is going to cause our quadrantinopia in the superior visual field. Okay. Still got the anterior limb, and we have all the posterior limb, and we're cutting down into the third ventricle here. So we're starting to top off what's going to be piece of the midbrain here. In fact, we're just about there, in that this is a shadow of the peduncle of the midbrain. The next slice should go down into the midbrain. Very nice, very nice. Now we're starting to see, we've lost all the diencephalon now, and we're down into the brainstem. So this is the midbrain. Here's our cerebral peduncles. Okay, and in between them here would have been cranial nerve 3, but we've pulled it off. There's a substantia nigra. Corticospinal tract is running right through here. Okay, along with the corticonuclear tract. Here's our nice cerebral aqueduct. We've gotten a little bit of the vermis from the cerebellum. And now we're down low, but we're still seeing these optic radiations coming around. Caudate's gone now. And what I was hoping to find, maybe in the next slice, we'll find the amygdala and the hippocampus.
Are we seeing mammillary bodies right there? In between the peduncles?
Yes, these are the mammillary bodies right here. Okay. Okay, again, we're looking at the peduncles of the midbrain here. Substantia nigra, lost in Parkinson's disease, cerebral aqueduct, common site for blockage, and you can see why. And we're into the temporal lobe here, but I think maybe one more slice we might find the hippocampus and the amygdala. This will stay together. Okay, now we're cutting down to the pons, and you can tell it's the pons because it's more circular. Here's the basilar artery laying on it. We're starting to flare open the cerebral aqueduct. So we have back here's the facial colliculi.
Try that one more time, please.
So these are the facial colliculi here in the rhomboid fossa as the fourth ventricle is starting to flare open. Okay, so underneath here is going to be abducens nucleus, and then sweeping around it, which you cannot see right now, is the facial nerve coming around to exit over here. But it's going to be a little bit deeper than that, just a little bit more caudal. We've broken into the uncus now, the temporal lobe, and we're starting to see some hints of some structure. So here's a little hint of the hippocampus here. So this would be the subiculum coming in, and we're starting to see a little bit of the head of the hippocampus. The amygdala is a little almond-shaped structure, which made us be a little bit out of plane. We'll see if we can see it on the next slice. Seeing some cerebellum in the back, cerebellar peduncles, periaqueductal gray. And we see these pontine fibers very nicely in here. And the corticospinal tract running down the front. Okay, we got a good view of the arterial system. There's a tiny little piece of the mammillary bodies left over that we saw in the last slice. Internal carotid. Coming off the internal carotid is the middle cerebral artery there. Coming off that is the anterior cerebral artery, which is running up above the optic chiasm. Here's the infundibulum that was going down to connect with the pituitary, which was left back in the tertia. Again, we've got a little piece of the hippocampus here. And the amygdala, we've missed the amygdala, but there's a little hint of the amygdala here. See if we can see it on this side. There's a little bit more of this ventricle left, so maybe, because we're in the medial wall of this ventricle. So maybe we'll get lucky and see a little piece down lower. In fact, what we may have is a little bit of the amygdala and a little bit of the hippocampus together. Still see these pontine fibers pretty well. Periaqueductal gray, it's flaring open now. So what we probably could see are the exiting nerves. No, a little bit lower. Okay, a little bit lower, and we should see the facial nerve coming out. It's going to be it right there. Okay, let's see if we can make a thin enough cut for that. Alright, this is going to be just luck at this point. Oh, and we saw a tiny piece of it. Let's see if we flip this over. Ladies and gentlemen, the amygdala. And coming back into what's going to be the hippocampus. We're out of plane of the hippocampus, though. But there's a piece of the amygdala. See it pretty well over here. Let's do one more slice through here. Okay, we're seeing the cerebellar peduncles coming back, and then in here is going to be the deep cerebellar nuclei. Okay, we got the fourth ventricle widely opening up, and you can see if I pull these things out of the way, you can see the median sulcus, and you can see the sulcus limitans right there. Okay, so that is the facial colliculus. And coming around off that, here's the trigeminal nerve, a little bit more rostral. And then coming out right to the sides here, which I don't quite see it, would have been the facial nerve. Final slice. Now the fourth ventricle is closing back down to the foramen majondi. We're into the medulla now. Actually, this is the transition between the caudal part of the pons and the rostral part of the medulla. Okay, and then we have the vertebral arteries coming up. That was ICA there, anterior inferior cerebellar artery. And again, we're seeing these deep structures. There's going to be some nuclei within this white matter that are those deep cerebellar nuclei. Seeing some of the vermis there. The inferior cerebellar peduncles. And then there comes cranial nerve 10, I believe. The vagus nerve, grabbing hold of that artery. You can see some of the deeper arteries there. And that's basically it.